So yeah, my name is Aviva Chomsky, and I am a professor at Salem State University. And even though I'm a professor, everyone calls me by my first name. So if you feel comfortable doing that when you're asking the questions, please do. It's A-V-I, Avi. And I got a PhD in Latin American history at University of California, Berkeley, way back in 1990. And living in California, I also lived in Spain for a couple years. I spoke Spanish fluently, and living in California, of course, even back then, like now in many parts of the US, there are large Spanish-speaking and Latino populations, but back in the 1970s, 80s, it was more concentrated in a few places, immigration, and California was one of those places. So I did a lot of work with immigrant communities while I was there. And then after I got my PhD and moved back to the East Coast, which is where I grew up, I continued to work on Latin American history and with immigrant communities that were growing in the area of Massachusetts, where I live now. And I wrote 2 books about immigration, and I guess I see the history of immigration and Latin American history is very tightly connected because so many immigrants are coming from Latin America. So I feel like learning about understanding where immigrants are coming from is a big part of understanding why they're coming and what they're doing here and their experience here. The first book I wrote about immigration, I published in 2007, and it's called They Take Our Jobs and 20 Other Myths About Immigration. And that was the book where my niece texted me all excited one day because she was on some trip somewhere and she was going through the Houston airport and she saw somebody reading my book in the Houston airport. And she said, now I know you're really famous because there was somebody in the Houston airport reading your book. And then the second book I wrote about immigration because I feel like the topic of undocumentedness became much more important and much more discussed and much more kind of like hot button in the second decade of the 21st century. And I published this one in 2014. It's called Undocumented: How Immigration Became Illegal. And, of course, I'm a historian, so, how immigration became illegal. I want to look at illegality as a historical phenomenon, like it's not just like a normal thing that's always existed. It's something that was invented by people. And so like, how did that happen? And how did we come to get used to that idea that some people are undocumented? Yeah, that's kind of my background. And I continue to teach at Salem State, and I teach a lot of classes on race and racism in the Americas, Latin American history, history of Latinos in the US, one that I'm teaching this semester.